And so we will have a very quick 10-minute presentation from the Waterfront Toronto staff, and they will introduce themselves before they do it. And then we will break right into small table discussions. We will spend about 20 minutes discussing, and after 20 minutes we will go table by table by table and share some of the key and top of mind concerns and discussion points. Does that make sense? Okay.
Thank you, Yulia, and thank you all so much for being here on your Saturday afternoon. We're deeply appreciative of that. My name's Aaron Barter. I'm the Director of Innovation and Sustainability, but I'm not alone. I'm with a few colleagues here, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves as well.
Good afternoon. I'm Caroline Kim, Urban Design Project Manager for Quayside.
Hi, everyone. I'm Vinaya Mani. I'm the Project Coordinator for Quayside.
Awesome. So Carolyn and I are going to speak for just about 10 minutes about sustainability, resilience, and climate positive development. And then we're going to shift into more of a discussion. So we look forward to hearing from all of you throughout the rest of this session. So with sustainability, we'd like to just clarify what we mean by that. And so we know that there are two big things happening right now with our climate, right? We know that we need to adapt and we need to transform cities in reducing their climate impacts. So we refer to that as climate change mitigation, and we know that governments in Canada have a goal to reach 80% reductions by 2050. And so at Waterfront Toronto, we want to explore how new neighborhoods can decouple urban population growth as cities continue to grow around the world from greenhouse gas emissions. That's number one. Number two is we want to enhance the resiliency of those new neighborhoods to survive and thrive in the face of climate change. Because we know that today we're in a climate crisis. And so it's fundamental that we not only adapt, but we also change our cities for the future. We refer to climate positive development as both of these things, and specifically working towards net zero carbon within new developments is our goal. I want to briefly summarize some of the public feedback that we've received to date. This is by no means exhaustive, and online there is a full repository of all of the discussions that have happened at public meetings, including last July. So this is only a snapshot, but at a high level, there was support expressed for heating and cooling innovations, ranging from the use of lake water for cooling, the use of geothermal or ground source energy, as well as other heat pump technology. There were also some questions about how well those things might work in Toronto. There was support for the use of building automation to improve the sustainability outcomes of a neighborhood like Quayside, as well as to improve the energy affordability, but that it must be done in a way that respects the privacy of citizens and makes it accessible for everyone. There was also support expressed for public sector investment in sustainability solutions, acknowledging that this is the direction that governments are moving in, and it is well aligned with public policy here in Canada. And lastly, there was support and discussion about solid waste management techniques, as well as including recycling, and there was a preference for municipal waste collection. I'm going to let Carolyn summarize the considerations.
And for considerations about mass timber construction, there was questions about potential amendments to the Ontario Building Code in order to provide tall timber buildings, with questions about fire safety in the mass timber. Also about the sustainability of mass timber construction, questions about the sustainability of mass timber construction in general. They felt that more clarity was needed on the metrics and where the lumber is sourced. And for local food productions, agriculture and community gardens should be a part of the plans, and suggested the latter could be located on rooftops.
And overall, I know that you've all heard a little bit about digital in the plenary session, but we wanted to reinforce that throughout this, Waterfront Toronto would require that if the project were to move forward, all solutions, everything we discussed today, would be compliant with existing and future regulatory and legislative requirements, as well as the digital principles and the emerging intelligent community guidelines. And this is good. There's good precedent for this with Waterfront Toronto in that we enforce a higher level of sustainability in all of our existing developments, and this would be a similar contractual mechanism. Getting into the evaluation results themselves, through the Sidewalk Labs MIDP, Master Innovation and Development Plan, there were 56 solutions brought forward that were designed to address Waterfront Toronto's sustainability and buildings objectives. Of that, there were 49 that Waterfront Toronto was supportive of and felt that they addressed our objectives. And there were 7 that we were not supportive of. And we'll get into some of those examples in a few minutes. I also want to highlight a few subsets of this analysis. One is that there were solutions, as I mentioned earlier, that were very well aligned with public policy here in Toronto with Transform TO and a climate emergency, as well as at the federal level and also at the provincial level. So we would be working with governments to understand if there would be funding available. And also, there would be some solutions that would need some regulatory reform. Carolyn's going to talk more about mass timber in a moment, that we would also explore how we could advocate for some of those changes. There are also 3 solutions that Waterfront Toronto would consider actually making an investment in as well, and I'm going to speak to that in more detail in a moment. Lastly, there were about half of the solutions that were brought forward in sustainability had a digital component to them, half did not. And so we've highlighted that in all of your materials. You have on your tables the discussion guide, and in the list of solutions, it indicates which of those are digitally enabled solutions. I want to also highlight that this conclusion does not mean that Waterfront Toronto is moving ahead with a project or partnership with Sidewalk Labs. All it means is that we see merit in these solutions and that we would consider including them in a draft innovation plan for the project. However, why we're all here today and the feedback from this round of public consultation will inform those discussions and negotiations with Sidewalk Labs. And of course, therefore, support for certain solutions could evolve and change based on the public feedback that we get today, based on discussions that we have with governments going forward and discussions with Sidewalk. So with that, I will dive into a few examples. We will be brief of some of the solutions that were brought forward. I'm going to begin with Passivhaus inspired buildings. This was a solution that we saw good merit in, and the reason for that is because we know that nearly half of Toronto's emissions are from buildings, and specifically burning natural gas for heating buildings. And so high performance building envelopes is something that could take steps towards reducing those emissions and therefore put Quayside on the path towards climate positive. This is very well aligned with what Waterfront Toronto has done in the past with LEED certification, but it is on a much more significant level. The other thing that I want to highlight is that with Passivhaus construction, there are some important co-benefits of that. One being more comfort for residents because you avoid the drafts that you sometimes experience close to windows, and there will be lower energy costs typically with high performance building construction. What we think is important is that this type of solution, which has been used in places like Vancouver and across Europe, is much more popular. These are typically more temperate climates, and so proving it on Toronto's waterfront, which is a harsh climate, as you all know, as you walked here today, is a priority for us. The second that I want to highlight is pneumatic waste collection. This is another example of a solution that Waterfront would consider making an investment in. So I'll briefly describe the solution and some of the potential benefits. This is in lieu of using trucks within a neighborhood and bins to collect garbage and recycling and organics. This is using underground vacuum tubes in order to collect this, all of these 3 waste streams. This better separates those streams, which reduces the amount of trash that goes to landfill, and it keeps garbage trucks off the street, which both has an aesthetic benefit, fewer bins on the streets, but also makes them safer for pedestrians and cyclists. And of course, as many of you may know, this is a proven solution, which is currently in use in places like Stockholm and Barcelona. So something that we see merit in bringing to Toronto's waterfront.
And for mass timber construction, Waterfront Toronto would like to support and advocate for government funding for the buildings innovation focused around mass timber construction. Sidewalk Labs' innovation for construction is based on a model which combines factory-based production and assembly of building parts and using a sustainable, locally sourced material, timber, and this aligns with our goals for high-performance buildings. Mass timber is a replenishable and sustainable building material that will have significant impact to reducing embodied carbons. And in case you don't know what embodied carbons is, what it is carbon dioxide emitted during the production of the material. and we believe that this has a positive impact in achieving high-performance buildings. Factory-based assembly using modular building parts can result in a cleaner construction. It can reduce construction waste and transportation-related emissions. This approach to building constructions has been done in mass timber buildings to date. And on digital electricity and a mist-based sprinkler system, which is an example of a solution to support and advocate for policy and regulatory reform. The buildings at Quayside is also designed to be all electric using low voltage digital electricity. Using digital electricity means that low voltage power can travel over small cables and along baseboards, in comparison to typical conduits that have to be hidden behind walls. The system would reduce the risk of fires and allow faster renovation times. And in addition to digital electricity, mist-based sprinklers are also part of the innovation, as they use 1/10 of the water consumption in comparison to a typical sprinkler and allows faster and easier renovation.
Thank you, Carolyn. So just to close off, I want to highlight a solution, one of the 7 that Waterfront Toronto was not supportive of that came forward in the Sidewalk Labs MIDP. So there was a proposal to capture sewage waste heat from the Ashbridge's wastewater treatment plant. Now we know that this is something that could be done, and we've seen it in other places around the world where that heat that comes from across the city can be used to offset natural gas consumption in buildings. But however, this is not appropriate for the Quayside project. It's not feasible, and we don't feel like it was an appropriate proposal for the site. So that being said, we're still entertaining other options, such as capturing waste heat from closer by sewage pumping stations, for example. This was one of those 7. And again, just to reiterate, the full list is summarized in your discussion guide. And so as I close off, I will say that over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm happy to answer any questions. And of course, for the rest of the afternoon, Carolyn and I and Vinaya will be here and happy to get into any of those details. So Yulia, I will pass it back to you.
Thank you. So before we start our small table discussions, I'd just like to point out a few things. So to help inform discussions today in this room, I suggest that you guys open your discussion guides, and this is attachment number 1. So this is the content for this room today. It looks like this. It has green heading as an identifier. Second, if you have any questions, please either tell your facilitator or just put your hand up. And Vinay, Caroline, and Aaron will be floating around, and they'll just come to you and talk to you and try to answer all of your questions. And number 3 is, as Nicole pointed out at the front of the room, it would be extremely helpful if you can tell us if you're generally supportive or generally concerned. We have 6 questions outlined in this section for you. This is a good starting place, but if you have other questions or other themes that you want to cover as part of sustainability and resilience and climate positive discussion, please feel free to do so. We are here to take notes and to make sure that everything goes okay. Any questions so far? No. Okay. So we will break into small table discussions for 20 minutes. I will check back in 20 minutes, after which point we will do a report back. Thank you. Okay, I think we're just about ready. So I know you guys have a lot to discuss and it's not enough time, but we'll try to do our best. We're going to start with our table. So very quickly, we are going to share with you a summary of the key discussion points from our table.
So at our table, there was an overall support of the innovations in sustainability and a desire for Toronto to act as a leader and show locally and globally that some of these innovations are possible, particularly to meet climate crisis goals and net zero goals. There were some questions about the big picture versus the small picture. So if there are parcel level innovations, how will it connect to expansion in the future? So that was with regards to district energy, with respect to heat waste recovery. So what's the connection between the individual mechanics versus the longer term expansion of systems? There was support for the public realm. So in the current City of Toronto context, there seems to be a desire to have more experience that are shared and public. And there was some positive remarks that this seemed to be represented in the current mock-ups. And an overall consensus is let's get to work, and Toronto can really lead these innovations. That seems good.
Okay, great. And if you feel like you want to add, correct your facilitator, please don't be shy. Let us know. We'll accommodate that as well. Hilda.
Hi. We had some very interesting points. Yes, most felt that it did raise the bar, although there are some concerns that coming from solutions need to be further challenged and explained. Again, this was also brought forth in the morning session. Also, more education on how it works from a sustainable perspective, including energy off the grid, as well as mass timber, and that includes with mass timber funding. How is the timber going to be transported? How is it going to be funded? And what will be the protocol for it? Risk and concerns evolved around Sidewalk and Waterfront partnership. How will they manage or control those risks and solutions earlier as opposed to later, and then it becomes a bigger problem?
Great. Thanks very much, Christine.
Thank you. We had a lot of nearby residents, people who are personally interested in the area, as well as some consultant and lobbyists at my table. The center point around what we came up with is a lot of clarification is needed about the solutions. For example, solution number 11, discounted mobility package, we had to guess what the definition that is. Another part is that we saw there are multiple solutions regarding parkings. For example, solution number 15, 28, and 30. Could you clarify why that's not grouped together and what is the difference between these solutions? Again, another difference we would like to highlight it is pay-as-you-go and also pneumatic waste. One recommendation is that we want to prioritize cyclist safety when it comes to the above-grade parking, and we want to prioritize retail and housing spacing, again, when it comes to above-grade parking, not using that space along the waterfront for parking, but more for retail and housing purposes. And the last priority is that we want to educate people around recycling, and we can only guess pay-as-you-go might be penalizing people for not recycling correctly, but the focus should be around education.
Yeah, thank you. Also very consistent with our morning sessions. Pay-as-you-go was also brought up as concerning due to equity, for example. So if you're a bigger family and you use more, so does it mean that you pay more? Okay. Nate?
All right. So our table had a surprising number of forestry experts, and they were very excited about timber construction, mass timber. Very, very positive about that in terms of reducing construction impacts on the neighborhood as things are going up, reducing energy use overall, using locally sourced resources and so on. They were also very excited about new building standards, making buildings more durable. I think we heard the word future-proofed, and in particular that the Passivhaus standard is quite robust. All in all, my table thought the proposals here were really well thought out and comprehensive, and I could not get them to say anything negative about it.
Great, thanks very much. Hi, Devishka.
We also had a forestry expert at our table, so. Our group, when asked what solutions they wanted Waterfront Toronto to prioritize, we went on a higher level discussion about the lack of metrics that were provided with the extensive list of solutions in the discussion guide, and how these metrics are actually essential for measuring the system's ability to achieve its goals of the site becoming climate positive. And so one of the big sticking points at our table was that the evaluation metrics were unclear that Waterfront Toronto used to determine which solutions would work and which ones would not work. It was also asked what lens Waterfront Toronto was using to evaluate these solutions, and it was mentioned that the amount of information is a little bit overwhelming, but then again, a lot of important numbers were not there, and some clarification would be well received. And finally, it was hoped that Sidewalk would or should come back with a new and revised MIDP as it applies to a 12-acre site based on the feedback from these consultations. So that was also a point at our table.
Great, thank you. Okay, last but not least.
Hello, everyone. So at this table, there was a common theme of a shift in stance from being skeptical about this project to being optimistic about this project because it has wonderful opportunities and capital. We talked a lot about the comparison between the July 2019 public consultation and today. Mostly we talked about there needs to be more visibility on the specifics within the discussion guide, such as how will they reach net zero for mass timber and other solutions. And we also talked about how the discussion guide felt a little dense and inaccessible. We don't feel very comfortable talking about it. And compared to the July 2019 public consultation, there was a lack of visuals to help the public understand. Oh, and there was also a big focus on the need for transit infrastructure and support from all levels of government within this project. Thanks.
Thank you. We have about 3 minutes left. One question I wanted to leave you with is actually the question that came from Hillary at our table, who represents the next generation. And her question was, are all of the supported solutions, will they be enough to actually achieve Vision Zero? So that's an interesting question.
Net zero.
Net zero, sorry. Yes, vision by 2050. And I think the follow-up question to that was whether we should be focusing on net zero or actually net positive. Any last words or questions? Okay, thank you. We're done.